We'll now talk about the other components of the processor or CPU, which we call the control unit. The most fundamental characteristic of the von Neumann architecture is the stored program. So what's a stored program? Well, it's a sequence of machine language instructions that are stored as binary values in our memory. And it's the task of the control unit to do several things. So this includes fetching from memory the next instruction to be executed. We then need to decode the instruction, which when we mean by decoding, we're talking about determining what it is that we're actually going to do. What is this instruction telling us to do? And then finally, we need to execute the instruction. So we do this by issuing the appropriate command to the ALU, the memory, or the I/O controllers, or some combination of the three. And then we just repeat these three steps over and over until we reach the last instruction in the program. And this last instruction is usually something along the lines of halt, stop, or quit. To understand the behavior of the control unit, we first need to investigate the characteristics of machine language instructions. Now, the instructions that can be decoded and executed by the control unit are represented in machine language. Now, these instructions are expressed in binary, and they usually have a typical format, something along the lines of having an operation code, and then address field 1, address field 2, and so forth. So we can see here that this format is broken up into two main parts, the operation code and the address fields. So the operation code, or sometimes referred to by the shorthand phrase opcode, is a unique unsigned integer code assigned to each machine language operation that's recognized by the hardware. So for example, 0 could be add, 1 could be a compare operation, and so forth. If the operation code field contains k bits, then the maximum number of unique machine language operation codes would be 2 to the kth power. Now the address fields are the memory addresses of the values on which this operation will work. So if our computer has a maximum of 2 power n memory address cells, then each address field must be n bits wide to allow us to address every cell, because it takes n binary digits to represent all addresses in the range of 0 to 2 power n minus 1. Now the number of address fields in an instruction usually ranges from 0 to 3, just depending on what that operation is and how many operands we need in order to do that operation. For example, let's say we want to perform the operation add x comma y. So what this means is we're going to add the contents of the memory addresses x and y, and we're going to store that result in the memory address y. Now, just for our purposes, let's just assume that the opcode for add is 9. And let's say the memory addresses for x and y are 99 and 100 respectively, and all three of these numbers are decimal. So the binary representation of this instruction would be something like this. So we'd have 0, 0, 0, 0, 1, 0, 0, 1. I'm not going to read all the zeros and ones, but the first binary number, the one that we have right here, this is our opcode. And then the other two values are the address fields for x and y. So this first number right here would be the address for x. So this is the binary value for 99. And here we're using a 16-bit address. I guess I should have mentioned that the opcode is using an 8-bit address. And then the second number right here is the binary representation for address 100, which again is a 16-bit address field. Now you can look at this and say, well, I don't know what's going on here. I don't know what the ones and zeros are. So I mean, as humans, we're not going to understand the binary code. But fortunately, the machine perfectly understands what this means, what the opcode saying we're going to do add, and then the next number is the address of the first number, and the second address is the address of the second number, where we'll also store the result. Machine language instructions can be grouped into 4 basic classes, and these are called data transfer, arithmetic, compare, and branch. So the first class is data transfer, and the idea is that these operations move information between or within the different components of the computer. So to give just a couple of examples, we may have something like transferring data from a memory cell to an ALU register. Or we can transfer something from a memory cell to another memory cell. And the transferring process works similar to what we've discussed before, in that the contents of the source are copied to the destination. So what is inside the source is preserved, but what was originally stored in the destination gets overwritten with the new data. So let me give you a couple of examples of operations that involve transferring data. So we can have something like load X. So this means that we would load register R with the contents of memory cell X. We can also have store X, which would store the contents of register R into memory cell X. And then another operation we could have is move X, Y, which would mean to copy the contents of memory cell X into memory cell Y. The next basic class is called arithmetic. Now, these operations would cause the arithmetic logic unit to perform some computation. Typically, they include arithmetic operations such as addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, as well as logical operations such as and, or, and not. Now, depending on the instruction set, these operands may be in the memory or they could be in an ALU register. So let's take a look at just a couple examples of these types of operations. And for our purposes, we're going to just use add for all of these, and you'll see some differences between them. So we could have something like add x, y, z. So this means that we're going to add the contents of x and y and store the sum in z. This is actually an example of a 3-address instruction. We could also do something like add x, y, and we have seen some examples of this before. So we add the contents of x and y, and we store the sum in y. This is an example of a 2-address instruction because we have 2 addresses in the instruction. That's why it's called a 2-address instruction. And then finally, we have something like add x, where we add the contents of x to some register R, and maybe there's like a specific register already pre-assigned, so we'll just say register R. So we'll add x to register R and store the sum in register R. And this is an example of a 1-address instruction.